Hello, everybody. Welcome to, actually, this is the last Music Works workshop of this particular season. We're going to be starting again in the fall. So this is our Music Works Making Noise in the Media workshop panel. We have a different moderator than me today, so I'm really excited to introduce Steve Jordan as our moderator. Steve is the founder and executive director of Polaris Music Prize. And before that, he has served as an A&R executive with Warner Music and True North Records. And then before that, you've been a journalist, promoter, activist, mediocre TV personality in Kingston. That's great. So Steve Jordan has a wealth of knowledge in the industry. He's definitely an advocate for artists, and it is really exciting for me to be able to just sit in the seat and listen to all of the questions that you have for our beautiful panelists. And with that, I'm going to pass this on to Steve Jordan, and he's going to intro the rest of the crew here.
Thank you. Please hold your applause. It's really nice that, thank you, Elise, for all the work you've done putting this together, and to Manitoba Music as well, too, for welcoming us here. In case you do not know, the whole Polaris Prize crew is here because we unveiled our long list this morning, which I am sure we'll be talking about, even though that's not the main topic, but we'll get into that later on. I'm also happy to see that the audience slightly outnumbers the panelists. It's always a good sign. So we'll start to my left. Ben Rayner was drafted as the Toronto Star's music critic back in 1998 when he was still just a wee sprout. For some reason, Canada's largest daily newspaper continues to employ him. And for that, he is very grateful. Prior to that, he did a little time at the Ottawa Sun, and along the way, he's contributed to a hodgepodge of publications that includes, I don't even know how to say that anymore. Accelerator? Accelerator? He's not the old Accelerator. Fashion and Spin.com. Currently serves on juries for Polaris and the SOCAN Songwriting Prize. He enjoys Joy Division and Kylie Minogue equally. Ben Rayner, everybody. Next to Ben is Olivia Michalczuk. Started writing volunteer pieces for local music magazines here in Winnipeg in 2015 at 21. Using those articles as sample pieces, she acquired a position at the Manitoban. What's the Manitoban? It's the
University of Manitoba
it's the
newspaper.
Great, yeah. So Olivia worked 2 years as an arts and culture reporter, one as an arts and culture editor before co-founding Papercut Winnipeg with Jared Gauthier. Papercut partners with local publications to report on current events and also releases a weekly podcast featuring local creators, musicians, visual artists, graphic designers, photographers, etc. Olivia is passionate about the Winnipeg music scene and supporting local artists with their representation in media. Olivia. And I will say everybody on here are Polaris Music Prize jurists, and for at least two people here, it's their first year serving, Olivia being one of them. Next to Olivia is Claudia McNeilly. She is a music and food writer, editor, television personality, probably not mediocre, living in Toronto. She covers hip-hop for Now magazine and does some food stuff, but more music stuff now. So, yes, everybody, it's Claudia. And then over there, right to the end, is Matt Williams, a writer and photographer who always makes sure to mention he's a born and raised Flatlander, Treaty 1 territory, when he has to put together short bios for things like this. His work has been published in The Fader, Vice, The Guardian, Globe and Mail, AV Club, and Now magazine. He lives on the East Coast now, a place decidedly less flat than where he grew up. So this is our panel, everybody. So we're going to start by kind of discussing the purpose of this was, A, to give people access and information on how it works collectively and individually for music writers and editors and people deciding what to cover, but also how the landscape is changing. I think it's very freelance now. Ben, I think, is the last freestanding music critic in Canada, or at least one of us, very small handful. So hopefully we'll explore that a little bit too. But yeah, so but initially, and we'll start on the end with you, Matt, and hopefully everyone has an answer for this. But how do you actually decide? What's the spark that makes you want to cover something, review something, report on something, and how does that intersect with who you vote for on your Polaris ballot? So it's a bit of a two-parter.
Well, to answer the first half, I'd say it has to catch my attention. It has to be good. But if I'm going to cover it, there has to be a good story. If there's no good story, it just becomes a record that I'm going to listen to all the time, which is great. But I have no reason to write about it, especially like you said, being freelance. I have to be able to sell that story myself to another person. So a lot of creating a good story, I think, is you get a lot of press releases that are like, we're just four great friends who play in a band and we really wanted to make a record, and that's really cool, but it doesn't make me want to interview you for an hour, right? And when it comes to Polaris, I have a really hard time separating the two. Like if the record has a good story and the record's good, or I find that most good records have a good story. I think it's rare that a record could be so good that it would make my top 5 without a good story. And that could just also be a story that the record tells. If the record itself, let's say a concept record or something, and it's very compelling, that's enough for me too. But then there's always a story behind what was the process that went into writing that story. So stories, I guess.
Stories.
Yeah.
Olivia, you were sort of nodding along. How do you decide what to cover, and how is that the same or different than your ballot, and this being the first year you've filed a ballot?
Sure. So for the Manitoban specifically, I was a student at the same time that I was writing. So a lot of it is ease of communication. A really great press kit and getting a hold of somebody really easy. If they give you the picture and what some interesting things about the album all in the press kit, then it's really easy for me. But if somebody send me an email, which I got 30 emails a day, saying I have someone maybe their representative saying there's a great band and I have a story if you want it, that requires 2 more emails than one with a really great kit. So for me personally, if you sort of spoon feed me in the position that I am, then that saves me steps, because I have to submit a story in 4 days, 3 days or something, while being a master's student and having my homework and all that type of stuff. So knowing who you're sending those things to is important. And it is important for my ballot. I did most of it based on just listening to it and if I liked it, and the questions, if it was why is it significant to music now? That's my own opinion. But also when I'm listening to something in another language, for example, I don't know sometimes what they're saying or what they're talking about. So having as much information and coverage as you can possibly have is really important. And also positive coverage. There's a lot of not cool people making cool music, and I don't want to vote for a not cool person that's making cool music. So I'm really conscious of the climate that they're coming from.
Interesting. Just a quick poll. How many people here are artists? Any publicists here at all? No? Okay, interesting. So let's try and maybe tailor our answers to artists who are representing themselves to you, because I think that can be a really scary thing. You don't really know how to approach, and it's kind of daunting. Because really you're an artist and you're just concentrating and trying to make the best music possible. Then you have to go out and tell your own story. It's a lot harder if you don't have a publicist kind of hyping you and running interference for you at the same time. You sort of touched on something. One thing that whenever I do one of these, try to instill in people is that make sure you do your homework about the people you're sending your music to and trying to get coverage from, the type of media they do, the type of things they do. If they don't do record reviews, don't ask for your record to be reviewed because it's a kind of a waste of time. If they seem to specialize in a certain kind of music and you do not play that kind of music, you're probably wasting your time. So do a bit of homework. On the Polaris site, we list all of our jury members and their media association. We don't give you their phone numbers or their emails. That's up for you to try and find that information. But it is a really good idea to know as much as possible about who you're pitching. Ben, I'll go to you now with that question. For Toronto Star, you get away with covering a lot of commercially marginal stuff, which is great, and you get that leeway. But you're really sort of hanging it all out there when you're backing something that it probably isn't commercially established yet. What's the spark that makes you decide to do that?
Well, it's changed a lot in the kind of migration from print to online, where we're very data bound now. So the latitude that I used to have, it's always been. I am in a kind of a different position where I'm not a freelance. I'm a staff, maybe one of the last staff music writers at a mainstream news publication, which is a really privileged position, and I assure you that I don't forget that. But it's always, the Star's always been really good to me. I'll be 21 years at the Star on June 22nd. As long as I pay attention to Shawn Mendes or Justin Bieber or whatever, whoever's coming through, Taylor Swift, as long as I honor those commitments and show up at those shows, which is just low-hanging fruit and something you should do. They've always been really good about letting me slide in the odd Dog Day feature, or I'm a huge Plastic Man fan, things like that. But it is it's really hard for me now to justify going to bat for something. It's sort of like what Matt said. Unless I really love it, and unless there's a good story to tell, it's harder now to sell. So that it does come down to a great album is a great album, but unless I have a way to pitch it so that an editor who's never heard of, say, Doom Squad or something that I like will go, that's a really great story. I can't really get away with it anymore. I used to have a lot more. I used to have a lot more latitude. And then there, one of the albums that I thought, this is a good story. One of the albums that I thought, I think it was number 2 on my ballot, was the Chastity record, Death Lust. But that is like an albatross perpetually hung around my neck since we put this paywall up at the Toronto Star, thestar.com, pardon me, where they're like, oh, that's the lowest scoring story you had in the last 3 years. And now I have the data, and they're like, nobody. They have all this stuff about the path to subscription and blah, 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 deep reads and who lingers long. And that one, I love that record, and it's hung around my neck all the time. It's just like, well, nobody read that. It was 1,200 hits. And you're like, oh, shit. Because Daniel Dale, reporting from Washington gets 500,000. So when you get 900 or 1,200 hits or something, it's so anyway, the balance isn't quite there the way it used to be. But it's the same thing with my when I have to do my Polaris ballot, I think about the stuff that I feel passionate about, and the stuff that I feel is most significant, like you said. It's that doesn't change. If you're passionate about something, I feel like you're going to listen to that the most, and that's generally, I've said this to you a number of times, just the stuff that you listen to the most, the stuff that you believe in the most, tends to be the stuff that makes your ballot. Does that make any sense?
Sure. You touched on something interesting, though. You're actually, after you get pitched, or you have an interest in something, then you have to pitch. So you're actually helping create the story or enhance the story too. That's interesting.
It used to be when you're just filling a print section. It's so, like, I mean, this is such an archaic thing. When you had to carve the drawings into the side of the cave, but like when it was just a matter of filling the print section, they needed 7 or 8 stories a day or blah blah blah. It was a very different thing from now, where it's we've introduced this paywall, and we're expecting people to pay way too much for a kind of a half-assed website. But that's another story. But there is this extra layer of justification, and it is weird. Like I don't, you know, now they talk about success, and it's not just clicks. It's like people reading to the end. But Cold Specs came to me last year, and she'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and nobody really, like my mom doesn't know who Cold Specs is. But it was a really good story because she had disappeared for a while, and she came back, and she emailed me one day. She's like, Ben, I've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. I want to talk about it to somebody. Will you talk about it? And that thing lit up our website, like the way music never does. Like I'm basically just unioned in now. Like they do not want me there. But as long as something like that comes along every so often. But it was a good story, and I think that's the extra layer you were talking about. Like when you have something, because it's great. I love a lot of bands, but it's like, they have a new album. It's slightly different than the last one. They've been a band for 10 years. That doesn't fly anymore. And I think maybe that's, like, to get noticed now, maybe, you know, if you're trying to get a foothold in the media, be it mainstream or alternative or like a blog or whatever, it does really help to have a narrative ready. And that's where shaping your bio or having a publicist to do that, just to give you that hook, really matters. Like it's harder to get noticed. A lot of people put music out now, but having a story helps.
This reminds me of a joke that was on Twitter about a week or so ago. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, I can't wait for someone's bio to say that this is their least personal album.
Or this is the best album we've ever made.
This is the 4th best album we've ever made, and it's our 4th album. So Claudia, throwing that question to you, like, how do you filter it down? When do you make the decision that you're gonna pitch something to the many places you pitch to?
So I will answer that question in a second. But one thing that I think is really interesting about the freelance economy that you guys were all talking about. Sorry, I didn't send an updated bio, but the main place that I've been writing for lately is XXL magazine in the States, which has been really great. And we put out our big freshman Cypher issue today, which was very exciting. But with all of that stuff and all of my contributions to the Cypher issue and most of the pieces that I write for them, it's gotten to a point now where most of my pitches get rejected, and then my editor will just assign me pitches that they've come up with in their private meeting. And I think that is a weird direction that some music writing seems to be going, where we're not even in the conversation of what is going to be covered. You're just lucky if you're on the receiving end of, you know, being assigned certain stories, which is too bad. And I think a lot of artists don't have that insight, because I still get, like, I get so many young artists DMing me on Instagram being like, please write about my project or listen to my music or whatever, which is not the right way to do it. I mean, maybe for some people, but I don't think that's the best way. But it's interesting that now as writers and as freelance writers, we're even one step removed from what is actually being covered. But in terms of actually pitching, I don't know, there's so many things that go into it. I think for me, everyone looks for something different in the music they listen to, but like if an album or a project connects with me emotionally, that's probably the number one thing that I look for. And if it's, whether it's the story and I know the background of the artist, like Puffy L's, who was part of, like, this rapper in Toronto, Smoke Dogg, who was tragically shot last summer. His like fellow gang member from Halal Gang, Puffy L's, is about to put out a new project, which I'm really excited about. But as soon as I heard Puffy L's is putting out a project, I'm like, already that story has captivated me. I'm following anything that's happening with that. So yeah, I mean, hopefully it doesn't come to someone losing their life, but like a captivating story that you care about, that you're invested in. Of course, you're going to pitch that. As soon as I heard that release, I pitched it to like 3 outlets, because I was like, I need to cover this. So yeah, I mean, the story and what you know about the artist, and probably also, I feel like the music scene in Canada, I mean, it's really big, but it's also kind of small. And I think a lot of it comes down to like personal connections, and if you've met an artist before and if you know them, and it just makes things easier. Like you were saying, when someone comes to you with a really good press kit, they're making your life a lot easier. If I already know, I don't know, if I already know like the publicist or how to access this artist, that's making my life easier too. So I guess as artists, like putting yourselves out there as much as possible and making sure that people can connect with you, you know, as easily as they can. But yeah, I just think mainly that it's interesting that a lot of the stories that are being covered in very large American outlets, some of them, like, the writers aren't even, like, we don't even have the say on what those stories are. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good answer. Well, they're all good answers, guys. You touched on something referencing publicists, and maybe you largely cover hip hop and rap. So maybe it's a tad different, the dynamic between, you know, journalist and artist. Does an artist need a publicist to get any of your attention? Because you talked about bios and things like that, and that's, you can have a self-written bio, obviously. And if not, and you all seem to shake your head, nope, that's not. But what steps can artists take? We sort of touched on something. What steps can artists take to make sure that they're taken seriously by you and noticed by you? I'll start with Matt again.
What can they do to make sure that I take them seriously?
Yeah, well, I mean, noticed and then taken seriously.
The first impression is important. Like what Olivia was talking about with the press kit. It can be like if I get, say, 40 emails in a day, and one has like a really cool picture with a really great subject headline, that's enough for me to like follow it a little more. If I hit whatever the song link is, because there's almost always a song, and I like the first 20 seconds, I'll keep going. And then if seems like there's a story there, I'll check it out. I don't think a publicist is necessary for it, but I do think that it can really help. And I think that mainly publicists help with their relationships with us, because I'm way more likely to, like, the thing is, I get pitches from so many publicists, and so many of them, like you said, are not actually researching what I write about and what I'm interested in and what I do. So all of those get deleted. Like, most of them don't get read at all or opened. But if I have a publicist that I trust, who's worked with me multiple times, who knows what I like, there's no way that I'm going to say no right away. I'm at least going to listen to the song and maybe the album. To be complete, like, if an artist wanted to do this by themselves, I'd say, if the
wanted to or needed to.
Yeah. I would say a great bio and some great press photos is enough to catch my visual attention and get my brain going, and then I want to listen to your song. If I'm sitting there being like, I'm a freelance journalist reading my emails, right?
Is the interface largely email? I've heard from some people who are like trying to get on your Facebook or into your DMs or whatever, and you know, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. But
huge no for me.
Yeah.
If someone tries to contact me like in a kind of personal way, maybe if they're an artist, I'd kind of consider it. But I've had publicists do it, and it's like, never want to talk to you again.
Right.
Don't text me when I didn't give you my phone number. Yeah, it's pretty weird.
A call.
Yeah, or call.
But if you don't have a publicist, I honestly, like, I will always read a personal note.
Yeah,
because you get those, like, especially you get like the form email. It's like, I have this new song. Here's my new single, and you can tell it's gone to everybody. You know, however many people you've scoured the internet for their email addresses or whatever. But I will say that like a personal note, like a friendly personal note from someone, hey, I'm an artist, blah blah blah. Would you take a listen to this? I'll read it and I'll take a listen. But if it's like a form bomb, I don't pay attention to and I get sometimes 600, 800 emails a day because I've been at this a long time and I work for the Star.
Dear Ben Rayner, Toronto Star, how are you today?
But you'll get like, it's just like, well, I am an artist from Brighton, UK, and it's like I get bombed with those all the time. And if it's a form letter, I don't. But if someone who's clearly taken the time to write, a letter, and it's like, hi, I'm playing a show at like a bookshop in Toronto next. But I'll read those. I don't know if it works the same way.
Every time, yeah.
And the personal touch really helps. And if you've met somebody and then you follow up, like it's something like this. It's the value of something like this. You come up and introduce yourself, and then it's like I'll get an email 3 months later, and it's like, hey, you met me in Winnipeg. I'm coming to Toronto. I remember those things. That I think the personal touch helps. I don't know, like just bombarding people with faceless, or just assuming that you've made a record and that you've sent it out there, like people are going to pay attention to it. It could be the best record in the world. I don't know, but like it doesn't get our attention. I don't think, right?
What about flattery? Does that work?
Almost always.
With Joy Division in the subject title, I usually read it. But.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. When you're writing to Ben, just put Joy Division in the subject header.
Yeah, I don't think that you need to have a publicist, and sometimes it's not a good idea to have a publicist. In my opinion, it's more some of those personal things. So I would get emails that say, hi, Seamus. Well, Seamus was the editor 2 years ago, and your publicist has the old contact information. And I see it as I'm doing a research project on you, and it's going to take me 3 hours to do. So if you can't take 2 minutes to see who the arts and culture editor is, then I'm not writing your story. That's an immediate delete. An immediate delete is saying, it's like unlike anything you've ever heard before. Like, try me. Give me 15 seconds with your song, and I'll tell you sound like Metro. So, like, whatever. Like, some of what I really like, for one that I would read would be some of that personal, like, hello, Olivia. I really liked this article that you wrote. I really liked this article that you wrote. Here's an angle I would like to take. I've attached my press kit, my photos, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like, whatever your story is, I almost don't care at that point. It's like, fine, you've done your homework. You've done a really good job. Yeah, and you don't need a publicist. You should be things that you can outsource or like try to find that one fan that's in the front of your show all the time and be like, I'll give you you can come to 2 of my shows for nothing if you write my bio or something. You know what I mean? Like someone in your community, and it sounds ridiculous, but like it's something that I've done in the past. Like, I really like this band. My friend knows I'm a writer, and they say, hey, can you write my bio for me? And there's there's one particular band that they put me as their manager on the guest list, and I've never had to pay to go to one of their shows because I wrote their bio. And I'm not saying nobody call me actually now that I've said this, but some of those, yeah. But if you're reading like Stylist Magazine, something small, and you have this like person who's really passionate about your music, and they wrote a really great like album review or something, like talk to them, or I don't know, like. I'm very Winnipeg focused right now, but it's like make those relationships and like find those people, and I don't know, like just do a better job. Like people are going to be doing a big research project on you, so like pay attention to them for like pay attention to yourself. Give yourself that 3 hours to do your press kit. Like invest in yourself. Be better at investing in yourself.
Can I add one thing to that too? Like
sure.
Don't spend the money on a publicist unless you are at the level where you think you have the money to spend on it, and you want to, you're committed to that level. Because if it's like if you can't afford it and it's going to blow the bank and you're not ready to hit that level where you need a publicist, don't do it. You can do the same work yourself. You really can. And I believe that honestly. Like with a little research and digging up some emails and figuring out who's the music writer here and there.
Invest in yourself. I like that advice.
I'd like to add one thing to Olivia's press kit talk. That's the camera. Metadata. Get your metadata in order. Please, please, please. It's the thing that makes my job more easy than anything in the entire world.
Yeah, do we need to explain metadata to the home audience?
Metadata is basically like when you go into iTunes and you hit get info, everything is lined up exactly as it should be. So the song title is the song title, the album title is the album title, the artist name is the artist name. Tells you the year it was made, what the quality of the file is, and every single thing that you need to know about it. And everything is in order. The track numbers are all in order. And when I get like a batch of digital files that have all that out of order or that tracks aren't named or anything, I might listen to it if I am extremely excited about the record, but more often than not, I'm just going to totally forget about it
Or
because
you
I don't
can't
even know
find
what
it.
the album is.
Or you can't find the tracks.
Yeah.
Like if it's folded into a play.
Claudia?
I agree with everything you guys said, but also something that you definitely should not do, which I don't know if that's very helpful. I get a lot of this though, is when an artist will like go on your Instagram and like 10 pictures and, you know, DM you and follow you, and then, you know, 5 hours later they'll unfollow you, and they think that like that's getting your attention, and in a way it is getting your attention because you're getting all these notifications. I feel like it's just a waste of everyone's time, and I get like it happens to me multiple times a day, and it's just not the right way to go about it. However, that being said, if you are not getting a publicist and you're kind of doing your own PR, I think having, like it goes without saying, but having like a very solid Instagram and a very solid digital presence is very, very helpful. And that doesn't mean liking 20 pictures in a row. It just means having a very curated, maybe not even fully realistic representation of your life, but a very curated version of who you are as an artist is like so important because then you see someone's page and within 5 seconds you kind of get a very good snapshot of what they're going for and the type of music they're making, and it's much more convenient than even like looking through, you know, press photos or press kit or anything like that.
Something that also popped into my mind is that if you're doing this by yourself, you need to put the person that you trust most in your band as the contact. So that, like, don't put the person that's, like, on call, like a doctor on call. Nobody's a doctor. What do I say that for? But, like, you know that they, not a doctor and a musician, like, why? But someone that's going to, yeah, Dr. Funk, that's a good one. So somebody that's going to answer their phone, and, like, don't give it to the person in your band that, like, yeah, John can answer his phone, but do we want John to represent us? You know, so like there's some times where like
Goddamn John.
Yeah, John sucks. And like there's been times where like I've written an article and I put what John said, and it was like it was almost too good because it was terrible, and I'm like, fine, I'll put what John said, like that's the contact that you gave me. And then I got an angry email saying like you bashed us in this article. It's like John messed up and you made it a better story because John's a jerk, you know? And like well, now we look like jerks. I'm like, well, fire John. You know, I don't know.
Hashtag
Get a new drummer.
fire
John
John.
sucks.
I gotta reiterate what Claudia said though. Don't, like, I hate the follow and then a bunch of likes and then, hey Ben Rayner, when are you gonna write about my band? This is my fantastic like in the public forum, not even a DM. Like when you just start harassing somebody. Like it's
a lot.
Like no, and I would like I don't know about you guys, but I'll be fucking merciless if you like I will come back hard, and you will never hear from me again. Like when like the public harassment.
Yeah, well, I understand the temptation to want to do that because social media, like people are so accessible through that. So I get it, but at the same time, you're wasting your time. And what would be 1,000 times more valuable, maybe slightly creepier, but I've seen people do it and it's worked. Find out like where does that writer or that editor, like where do they hang, like what club do they go to, what shows are they going to, go to their, like connect with, like who are they friends with, like actually
where do they live?
No, but like actually try to make, if you have if you're living in the same city as them, you probably already know something about them. Like at least in Toronto, you probably already have mutual friends with them.
I was joking, by the way.
Yeah.
Sorry, don't try and find out where anyone lives.
But like just try to connect with them face to face in person, and those connections like go so much further.
Yeah, if you're covering a scene, be a part of that scene.
Exactly.
Or if you want to be a part of the scene, try and be a part of the scene.
Yeah, like knowing their face is something. That's good, that you know their face and then you see them. But yeah, like when you said find out where they hang out, like you want to find someone that hangs out where you hang out, right? Like if you're a shoegaze band and I'm a shoegaze writer, then know my face so that when I come to your show, you can talk to me. But don't be like, oh, I know I'm metal, but I'm going to go to the shoegaze show because that's where Olivia hangs out. Like, I think that's wrong.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is...
Don't camp out on their lawn. That's what we're saying.
Next question is for everybody but Olivia. Well, you'll see why. So for artists who aren't from where you're from, the three of you largely cover local scenes. You're probably more national in your East Coast perch, I guess, than these other two. How do people outside of Toronto, maybe it's just a question for you two, how do people outside of Toronto, i.e. Winnipeg, cut through the massive amounts of local music that it's your job to cover, but also you're inundated with because you're more accessible to them than say someone from Manitoba or Alberta or New Brunswick.
Should I start?
You go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking specifically with Canadian hip hop, which I don't know if that's relevant. I guess it's relatable to all genres. I don't know. For me, when I first noticed an artist, to be perfectly honest, when I actually like get into them and start really sinking my teeth into them and listening to them, it's often from like a playlist like Northern Bars or something or like a YouTube music thing that has already been curated by someone who really knows the scene in Canada. And then I'll go deeper into that artist's work. If you can't get your stuff on obviously playlist selection and curation is so important. And I think in that way it can really help to have a publicist because they can be emailing those like Spotify and those big places and actually trying to get your music out there. But so that stuff is really important because you're like suddenly getting into the ears of like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that wouldn't have heard your stuff. And provincial borders don't really matter in that way. No, it doesn't say like, oh, you're from Winnipeg or oh, you're from BC. You're just an artist alongside all these other big acts that are on the playlist. But besides that, I think it's really hard and it's very important as someone who is from Toronto and writes a lot about the Toronto scene to acknowledge, like, I have a really big bias probably in terms of artists coming out of Toronto just because I know so many of them personally at this point and talk about stories that you're connected to or feel excited about if you already kind of know someone to some extent. I don't know. It's hard. I think if you can try to make some kind of, I think it's up to us, to be honest, as journalists to look outwards more and not just be so insular with Toronto. I know that's something I have to get better at. And as artists, if you can just try and get on as many international or national platforms like Spotify or Apple Music or anything like that, that's going to help you break down a lot of barriers as well. But I think it's more of an industry problem because I know there's a great scene in Winnipeg, and the more people I talk to, the more I realize like there's a lot of stuff going on here, and it's like it's my problem that I'm not aware of 3/4 of it. Yeah, although I don't know.
There is a Polaris jury forum where people can put that stuff out for your discovery.
Right.
Ben, what about you? You also cover touring bands coming through, including independent touring bands coming through, and you try to give them some time and some coverage. How does that cut through for you?
Well, I was gonna say, like, I'm a live music guy, so a really good way to get my attention. And not everyone can afford to tour and stuff, but a lot of the time, the stuff that I come back to obviously in Toronto, I have access to all these great Toronto bands that play all the time, and I can watch them grow and mature and all that stuff. But if you come through once and you blow me away, I'm very loyal. You know how like Steve and I are very good friends, but I will really get behind something. Like if you blow me away when you come through town, quite often I will be the guy that emails you or your manager or your publicist the next day. I'll be like, holy shit, if they ever come back, I want to talk to them. And that's like if you that's one way. I'm not saying everyone has that opportunity, but for me, a lot of it is a experiential and live thing. Like I'm so like live is so important to me, just in terms of like falling in love with a band, and I really do fall in love with bands. So if I see a band, sometimes that's an easier way to cut through than a record. But I know not everybody has the money or the time to tour. So cutting through the noise, I don't know. It's hard in Toronto because Toronto is Toronto, and there's a lot going on there. But just getting in front of, like, getting your music in front of someone like me or Claudia in the big city in the right way, in like a friendly way, or through the right channels. And a lot of it does come down to personal context. Like the Canadian music industry is pretty small in the grand scheme of things, and everybody kind of knows each other. And it's not even like 6 degrees of separation. It's like 2 degrees of separation, I think, a lot of the time. So doing your research and knowing that there's a writer in town X or town Y who is into the kind of stuff that you do And it doesn't take a long. It's like a Google search, like music writer, Saskatoon. It's like, oh, this guy loves My Bloody Valentine. My band sounds like My Bloody Valentine. I should email him. And it's not that hard to find that kind of information now. So I think it's just kind of being aware of who you're reaching, and going after the wrong. Like I feel so bad for it because this tends to be the only kind of like CD mail out that I still get, and it'll be like the guy with the acoustic guitar, and it's always the same record, and I feel so bad because my desk is littered with them, and it's just like maybe you picked the wrong guy to mail that. Not the guy with the acoustic guitar isn't going to have a perch with me, but it's like you probably didn't do your research, and you could have saved yourself $375. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, 100%. Also, I feel like we're being like pretty negative in terms of how people but not. I mean, I feel like what I said was pretty like, I don't know, it's my fault. But I also want to say
I hate myself.
I think it's very important, like especially right now. You were saying there's like 2 degrees of separation with everyone. With the internet, with like everything is so globalized now. As artists, I don't think people should be thinking like, oh, how can I get my music through to Toronto, or how can I get my music through to Canada? Like, think globally. Think like, how can I get my music to the States? How will people in Europe listen to it? Like, where am I putting it? How am I making it accessible for everyone? Like, it's really shouldn't. I don't think like you. I mean, obviously, if you're from Winnipeg, you're from Winnipeg, but that's just where you're from. Like, don't let any of that be any sort of barrier in your mind. Like, your music can really play anywhere.
But like don't be like, if you blow up in your hometown, that people will notice in other towns.
Right.
Like, don't forget that.
True.
Like, if you're like the biggest band in Thunder Bay, that can become your story too.
Right.
It's like this, they're knocking the socks off Thunder Bay, and I say that mockingly, but I mean that. Like, that's good armor. It's like, no, we've been selling out Thursday nights at this bar for like 8 years, and here's our record. We're touring now, and we're back. Like, the Tragically Hip started from that kind of like, baseline,
right,
local, regional thing.
But at the same time, this rapper Rich Brian, who grew up in Indonesia, learned how to speak English from YouTube, did not come to America till he was like 19 or 20. When he finally got to America, he was already super famous because of his YouTube videos and like just going viral on the internet. I feel like that's such an inspirational story. Like, you don't have to. I mean, I don't know what Indonesia's hip hop scene is like, but this guy was massive when he got to America. When he was still a teenager, when it was his first time here, like, let that be some kind of inspiration.
This topic kind of leads me into my next question, which is, the way it used to be. You got a print story or a story on a major website. That could launch you. That was like a big deal. And now it seems to be more reactive. Really strategically should be trying to get on all the services, trying to land a couple playlists like you were talking about, and then there's a story to cover afterwards if any of that gets any traction. So how do we all deal with that as writers, where I'm not saying what you're doing is necessarily secondary to all that, but it seems to have a different kind of importance and relationship to someone's career trajectory.
Could you ask the question again?
Yeah, so it wasn't really a question; it was more a statement. I was looking for comments on.
Oh,
but I'll try and rephrase as a question.
I was waiting for the inflection so I could answer.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Like you, for instance, working
Sure.
at a university paper, which is great, and I'm glad that they still exist. But the relationship to printed media is different, and the relationship for a musician to getting their music out there no longer sort of relies on getting their new release covered as much as it does like getting on the services and landing on playlists. Maybe not so much for you, so feel free to comment either way.
Right. So, I mean, I don't know. Some of my favorite bands, my favorite Winnipeg band has. You can barely find their music anywhere. You can buy their tape if you want it, sort of thing. And they're building that desirability. I don't know if they're doing it intentionally or they just don't care if people listen to their music, though I think they do. I'm not sure. But, like, it makes me more excited because they're not doing the things you're supposed to do.
Right.
And they don't have this, like, beautiful cut, tailored Instagram. It's sort of like a picture of like one of them like this because they were blinking in a picture, and you're just like, so the desirability of like, I want the album and I want to be their friends, and like it's like an image, right? So I mean, and they're getting covered in places, and they have a couple songs on like YouTube or something like that, and that's where you can access them. You can buy the tape, or you can go on YouTube. But when you're trying to get big and out there and all that types of things, like I think just like building the amount of like media that you're on, so you can start with Stylus and the Manitoban and the Uniter, the three like publications in Winnipeg that are like the two university newspapers and the music magazine. And if you get in those three and then you send it to someone else saying the United said this and the Manitoban said this and this, like sometimes you don't even like read who said it. You just see these three quotes like, this band's so great, da da da, and then you can get a bigger one, and then once you start building it, your press kit says 19 people said all these great things about me. Well, that's super important. So someone might not read your whole article, but they will see that all of these people are saying things about you, which means that somebody bigger will say something about you. And you may be big in Winnipeg, but then when someone in Toronto sees that everybody in Winnipeg loves this band so much, there you go. So like I think having, even if nobody ever reads your article, still having someone talk about you is pretty important. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. It wasn't really, it was a very poorly phrased question, so I thought you did great. Matt?
What you said about like the idea of that being the process, like getting it big via the playlisting and then getting media attention, I think it's the most boring story in the world. And when someone sends me, definitely a press release that gets deleted without me reading it is one that starts with, this artist has been like racking up the streams. Like, I don't give a shit. I could not care less at all. If the music's no good, it doesn't matter. So I think that unfortunately that like there's a way to make a living that way. I wouldn't necessarily call that being an artist. I think that the value in pursuing, and I mean this could get into a way more complicated conversation, but I think the value in pursuing people to help tell your story in a coherent way, as opposed to people seeing that you've gamed the streaming system, is much more valuable to your life as an artist than it is like for whatever short term 25 cents that you get from your 100,000 streams or whatever. And I think that also goes a long way toward helping you turn your career making art into a lifelong thing, because you're building something as opposed to making some quick money. And I think that without those stories, then you're not able to get to the next point, basing.
Anybody else want to comment on my poorly phrased question?
I think it's not really an answer, but obviously
it's good. It wasn't really a question.
Obviously all media has changed so much, and especially with music, and like especially in hip hop, it's super annoying because people will drop projects without saying anything, and that's the norm now. Like you have no idea when like the biggest projects are coming out, so I don't know when I can review them.
Drake released 3 new songs while we were talking just now.
I wish. But I think for artists, there's a lot of power in that. Like finally, we don't have all or most of the power. We have a very small fraction of it, and most of that comes from like, even with reviews, especially with traditional media, I think like some of the biggest reviews now come in the form of YouTube or a talk, like just totally new platforms. No one really, like, obviously traditional reviews are still important, and I'm glad that I can still write them, but they're not as important as they used to be. And as artists, I feel like there's a lot of power in that, and you guys should take that into your own hands and figure out how you can use that to your advantage. Like, how can you build your own audience so that when you decide to drop something, people will pay attention just through social media? Or how can you use, like, with, I don't know, I feel like that's just an important thing to highlight.
Well, and also too, like I think it's kind of knowing your ideal audience and how you're going to reach that audience. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're the kind of band that, say, Pitchfork is going to love, then going that route and reaching that audience is. But maybe you're like, with all due respect to Nav, because he's a very nice guy, but someone like Nav, it's like it was very important for that last Nav record to be a number one, and they were going to game it and get as many streams as they could and hit that number one on the Billboard, and that's a pivot to the kind of audience that, say, Nav was looking for. But I think it's good to kind of be aware of where you're, I hate to use a word like market, but like know who you want to reach. You know what kind of music you make. You know the kind of audience that's probably going to respond most to it. Do you want a live audience? Do you want a streaming audience? Do you want the kind of people who salivate over stuff that very nerdy music critics write about? But it's knowing who to target and knowing which media route to kind of weave through to get to that target, if that makes sense. Like again, it comes down to kind of doing your research and knowing knowing who you want to reach and the ideal way and the ideal, I guess, gatekeepers through which to reach those people. And it doesn't have to be like expensive and time consuming. I think it just maybe like this being aware of how stuff gets out there, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Probably not. It wasn't a question anyway.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you all for answering my non-question. I do have a question, though, and it's the last question before we go to audience questions. Thank you all for staying the entire time. And that is, and this is a way for you to get to know the tastes of everyone who's up here. What was on your Polaris long list ballot?
Me? Why? You go first.
I can't remember my password, so I know 4 out of 5. And I couldn't change it because I'm not very bright with technology, but I know Voivod's The Wake was my number 1. And Chastity's Death Lust, which sadly didn't make the list. I know the Doom Squad record was on there. And Fucked Up's Dosage. It was a heavy. I was in a punk rock mood, whatever, that night. A metal mood. I think maybe Dilly Dally, but I feel like there was some. I feel like I'm forgetting something, and I couldn't verify it today. But anyway, I'm very used to not having any of my selections on the long or short list, and I was pleasantly surprised that a few of them came up this year. But go Voivod. Go Voivod.
All right. Olivia.
So mine was Les Louanges. That's the good record. He told me just now. He said, we didn't talk earlier. That was mine. Yeah. Marie Davidson. Living Hour was my number 1 pick, a Winnipeg band who's incredible. I put Jessie Reyes on it. I really liked that album. It was like short and sweet and really packed a punch. And I believe Doom Squad was my other one. I'm pretty sure.
I have 2 Doom Squad voters sitting next to each other. That's crazy.
Friends for life right there.
Yeah.
Claudia?
What did I put on?
Or maybe I took it off.
I definitely voted for Havaya because I thought 13th Floor was incredible. She's also amazing live. I don't know if you love live perform. Like that was the first time I saw her actually. She was opening for this guy Sheck West, and I was like, who is this woman? She's amazing. And then I also had Toby's album Still, which is fantastic if you like any sort of funk, soul, Anderson .Paak vibes. It's great. And then I had this guy Frie who did not make the list, but he's great. And then my last 2, I don't want to misname them, but yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter. But I'm glad that Toby and Havaya both made the list. I think they're great.
I also love that Toby record. And good, right? Yeah, and the Havaya record was on my ballot. And Alexandra Strelitzky's Inscape, really beautiful piano instrumentals. The Jessie Reyes record. Isla Craig's The Becoming, which didn't make it, which is this kind of a really beautiful blend of like R&B and soul and alternative and folk music. And Belle Plains, Mercy Malice, Grief and Wrath, which is a Regina. I think she's from Regina. Country record, which I put at number 1 because I was worried no one would vote for it, and I didn't.
That's not
didn't
true. Somebody did vote for it.
I did.
You.
I did.
All right, I think that's it for these guys. Do we have questions? Elise has the microphone. We have a question up front, Elise.
Hello, my name's Amber. I have a question about Instagram. So I'm a jazz musician. Most of my fans are older. I kind of doubt they're on Instagram. Should I still have a curated Instagram just so I can send it to writers?
I don't think you should have it so you can send it to writers. I think it's just important to take, I mean, if it's going to take up a lot of your time, maybe not, but I think it is somewhat important to just be on that space. Like if you can, you know, even put like 10 pictures up in an hour and just let those live on there and just that's your page. And then when you feel like promoting a show or something like that, you can take 5 minutes to do it. It is a way of reaching a whole new audience if you are able to connect with other people on there. And I think often, like if I'm at some kind of music or networking event or something like that, beyond, oh, can I get your card? It's like, oh, what's your Instagram? So it is like a very important way of keeping in touch with people, I think. And if you have the time, I would say it's probably a good thing just because it'll probably open your like audience up to even more people. I don't know. But I mean, obviously it's like a blessing and a curse. It's not worth it if you're going to be spending a bunch of your time on it. Yeah.
I think if your audience has Instagram, then that's what you should be doing. And if your audience has Facebook, that's what you should be doing. And if your audience likes getting email newsletters about all your shows coming up, then email them newsletters about shows coming up. My articles are never dependent on whether or not someone has social media. I think that if I'm getting a good press kit, again, then if you make it easy for me, then that's good. And if some of your audience or like some of the writers find it easier if there's pictures and showing some of your personality, then that's cool too. But yeah.
Just say, like, I don't really, like, I'm a total Luddite. I've only owned a computer for like 5-6 years. I hate them. They'll never catch on. I'm kidding. But I think sometimes the one value to having like a fun Instagram or Twitter, like if your personality is entertaining and if you kind of have a vibe to your account, like there's some bands I just like. Jan Arden has an amazing Twitter account. It's usually just drunk Jan, like, or Burton Cummings. Burton Cummings, to use a Winnipeg example, everything's in all caps and it's just like random lunacy, but it's kind of compelling and that, you know, draws people in. So if you can give people a window into your, you know, if you have something that's worth sharing through those media, I think it's totally, it can become part of your brand, quote unquote.
Donovan Woods gives good Twitter.
Donovan Woods is hilarious.
But I feel like it has to come naturally to some extent. And if you're stressing about it and if it feels forced, then I feel like you should just focus on your music because the work always speaks more than anything else at the end of the day. But like, yeah, if it comes naturally and it's amazing, then like you should totally do it.
Some people are really fun, but like also you can tell when it's fake, right?
Totally,
you can tell when
totally.
like the publicist is doing the Instagram or the Twitter account.
100%. Yeah.
Like brands tweeting with modern slang. It's the cringiest thing in the world.
Or if you like, if your Instagram,
it's lit.
Pepsi, it's lit.
or if your Instagram's just like pictures of you in front of a brick wall, pictures of you on a train track, like, oh my gosh, like, you know, like
Your
make
Godspeed You Black Emperor.
Pardon me?
Like Godspeed You Black Emperor, the train track stuff.
Yeah, but that picture's awesome because you can't make out any of them.
Yeah, right.
There's zero definition to the people in that picture.
Yeah.
What I meant is if you're just putting your press photos on Instagram, then don't have one.
Have something to say.
Yeah, have something to say.
But I feel like also if you already have a fan base, you would probably be surprised by the amount of people who would already follow you on Instagram just from the jump if you've already have something. So you're already starting like ahead of the game.
All right. Anyone else? Do I have to start singling people out? Elise?
I have a question. So when we talk about quotes, right? Press quotes are really great, and they're really great for an EPK. Is there, and I guess like music reviews are kind of decreasing. Like there's not as many like spaces for that. But you are still experts in that area, and you still have a really valid opinion on the music you're listening to. to. Did I say that right? Music you're listening to. Okay. Do you ever offer like a quote for like a review without writing the story? If someone is like, hey, can you listen to my album and give me a quote?
Oh, like a book testimonial?
Yeah, like something like that people can include in a press kit.
I've never thought about it.
Oh.
Yeah, that's never
I
happened.
would maybe if I loved the band, but I'd rather they hire me to write their bio. And honestly, I think that those kind of quotes, like the pull quotes, are really for like audiences. I never read them unless I wrote them, which is a vain thing to say, but
See, but I read what you know, like I can read a trusted.
Oh yeah,
reviewer.
or I know the person. If I see that a specific writer that I follow wrote it, then I might pay attention. But really, like I'm going straight to the bio or
Right.
listening to the song.
But like if you're sending, so say you're sending a press kit to like a label or somebody someone else who you want to have listen to the music, and it's like, oh yeah, Ben Rayner from the Toronto Star said this, and it's like a really cool quote. Like, what are your feelings on that, and would you be willing to do that?
I'm fine. Like I would prefer to write the bio, but I will say don't do that. Like if you're going to ask someone to give you a quotation to use in your bio, perhaps you should probably have a relationship with that writer or know that journalist has supported your work in the past. Because I get these cold call emails sometimes where it's from a total stranger, and it's like, could I get a quote for my record that I'm putting out? And it's like, I don't know you. I've never heard your music. And that's just a bit of a faux pas. I think it's sort of like DMing a total stranger, or not even DMing, like hitting someone on like Twitter or Instagram. Hey, when are you going to write about my record? Just irritating them. But it's like, you know, if I love your band and I'm at the show all the time and you're like, hey, we're going on tour in the States, or could we have a quote for our bio? It'll be like, maybe I consider that, but for God's sake, like have some sense about it. Like don't approach a stranger and ask them to do something out of the blue, because you know that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, ask them to just write an album review, and then say that like, I'm trying to get this album out. I'm trying to send it around. It'd really great if you could listen to it. I'm trying to get like quotes also for my EPK. That's something. And also as someone who is like so fiercely in love with the Winnipeg music scene and wanting everybody to thrive, I like add quotes. I will like put a perfect sentence. You can look at all my album reviews. I'll put the perfect sentence that'd be like, I hope this is the sentence they copy and paste and put it in. And don't put like ... great ... thing, you know, like, yeah, like I'm going to put a sentence in there that you can copy and paste and put in your bio. And like, that's something that I'm like really conscious of, but at the same time, make sure you're putting the right quotes. If you have somebody saying it's unlike anything you've seen before, or like put the Beatles and like the Chipmunks in a blender and you got our band, like, oh my God, I'm not going to listen to that. Like pick a good quote and pick good writers to send it to. Like, if you like my writing and trust my writing and trust that I'm going to do a good job of your album review, then send it to me, and then you're going to get those good quotes. So like start with some of like, for me in Winnipeg, I feel like sort of like a low-hanging fruit. Like I'll just write almost about anything if I like it, or if I don't like it, I'll just tell you, like, I don't think you want me to do an album review because I don't like your album. And like I'm pretty honest with people, and I'm like, but you know, probably like this person likes it, so ask them instead. But like build those relationships, and then like get the good quotes from people that you trust. That's what I would say.
Right on. You had a question behind you there.
Hi, I'm a music journalist, but I've just kind of started out. So this is actually
Cool.
really helpful.
And you still want to do it after hearing everyone today?
This has been really, really helpful hearing all this, but I'm just wondering, like, I'm still doing it on a volunteer basis, so I'm mostly focused on hip-hop music, but I still occasionally get requests from people who like from genres or like from country music, and I honestly don't really like country music. So like, do you have any tips for music journalists who are trying to, you know, make money doing this?
I don't, so I'm not the person to ask.
I feel like when it comes to the idea of, oh, maybe I should write about country or whatever else. I think if you're going to do criticism about anything, you should do it from a place of being a fan and liking what you're writing about. It helps you be objective, and it also like helps you write well, and not just positive reviews, but like I just think you should start criticism from a place of being a fan and not like immediately being like, oh, I don't like this, or I'm trying to. If you don't buy what you're selling and what you're saying, odds are other people aren't going to buy it either. You should never write something thinking that like, oh, this is what some other person is going to want to hear. So don't write music that you don't write about music that you're not a fan of. In terms of just pigeonholing yourself as only writing about hip hop, if that's mostly what you listen to, that's kind of what I did when I started, because I was like, it's 99% of what I listen to. And the reason I got into it pretty late, because I was like, who wants to hear my opinion about hip hop? Like, no one's going to want to hear this. So I kind of like dipped my toe in and then like got deeper and deeper as I realized people were like accepting of my opinion. But I think if you can do it in a way that makes sense and like respects hip hop, and you're a fan of it, and you're just putting people that you love and acts that you love on, pigeonholing yourself into one genre is really helpful. Probably anyone who writes about any specific genre can say that. It's like you pick your beat and suddenly you open up, you know, all these doors of opportunity with people understanding immediately what you write about. So I think it's really helpful for getting work.
Yeah, I would just add work on your craft as a writer.
I have a quick one.
Identify a few hip-hop writers who you think are really great that you'll never be as good as, and try and be as good as them. And I think in the end, people will notice that when you start sending your stuff around, and I think that can lead to actual paid work.
I would just like to add something about working on your writing. I can tell personally how long somebody's been writing based on just like reading it and the amount of times they use the word raw or genre bending, or like ephemeral is one people really like to use.
Hauntingly beautiful?
Pardon me?
Hauntingly beautiful?
Hauntingly, oh my gosh.
Achingly beauuful.
Did you guys read my articles when you got here? No, of course. None of us read each other's articles. No, I'm kidding. So things like if you're writing about hip hop and then you wrote 3 hip hop articles and you use some of the same words for all of them, then you're not really doing a good job. So if somebody gives you a country album, like I would say give it a shot so that you're actually describing the sound, like what you're actually hearing, not saying like, if you don't know, like if somebody's like always writing about country and a green writer writing country and talking about twang, if you say the word twang over and over and over, and you know that's like a buzzword, like you need to abandon those buzzwords and push yourself in different directions. Because like the first album review I ever did, I didn't know anything. Any words that I needed, I'd like have to phone people like crying. I'm like, what's the thing where it goes like whoa 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 and they like tremolo? I'm like, thank you, like because I didn't know any of these things, right? So it's like make those relationships, push yourself out of your boundaries, and then actually learn how to describe what you're hearing and what you're feeling. And then with maybe like a few different genres that you're trying out, then you're going to be able to better describe hip hop from what you're feeling and experiencing, rather than just some of those buzzwords that you put out to do bad album reviews. Not saying that you do bad album reviews, but they're going to get bad if they're the same over and over. You're not special anymore. Your opinion doesn't matter if it's the same one over and over again.
It's funny. I just got. I'm not a jazz guy at all. No offense. I like it. My father's a jazz musician, but my first, and I'll get to my point here. When I was starting out, I was working for the Ottawa Sun as a summer student, and my first assignment, like from the entertainment editor, he's like, "Do you want to cover the Ottawa Jazz Festival for me?" I was like, "I don't know anything about jazz." And Brian Gorman gave me a very good piece. He was like, "Well, you like music, don't you? You respond to music. Let's write about how you write from your response." And from that, I would extrapolate, and this is what I say because I just had this conversation. I'm mentoring a student for the Toronto Jazz Festival News Corps, and when I had to sit down with him last week, and this is the first piece of advice I give to anyone who asks me about starting out in music journalism, was like, don't be afraid to have a voice, because there's a lot of people who think they can write about movies or dance or music. Like they think everyone's a critic, right? But if you work at it, so you got to work at it, but you develop a voice And that's how you get a leg up on everybody else who's doing it half-assed. And it's like, it's just doing it and doing it enough and having the confidence. Don't be cocky, but having the confidence to express your own voice goes a long way. And when you have a voice, I find those are the, those are the people who kind of last. Because a lot of people can kind of do it wishy-washy, and you can repeat what you read in USA Today, and you can do stats, and you can do a concert review and basically list every song that the person did. And I read a lot of those reviews. But the people who aren't afraid to express an opinion and do it in like kind of a confident and stylized way, and you can kind of hear their personality coming through in the words on the page. Those are the ones who make a career of it, I think.
Yeah, I think all of that's amazing advice. I totally agree with the pigeonholing thing. Like, don't be afraid to, learn to be an authority on your genre. And both of your points kind of blend into one another for me. Like, all you're doing as a music writer, and people think that you have to have all these crazy credentials, or like you're not allowed to write about certain types of music or whatever. All you're like Ben said, or his ex-editor said, all you're doing is communicating to other people what your reaction to something was as someone who listened to that thing. That's all that I've done. I imagine that that's all that these people have ever done. Some practical money-making advice. Write bios.
True.
And if you want to do music journal, I would say a very underrated piece of advice is to learn to take photos. Because if you're doing live stuff, or if you're like have to shoot someone for like you meet up with them for an interview and you have to shoot a photo, knowing that you can do it well and being able to show your editor that like, oh, I have the visuals for this article is kind of invaluable. So learn to use a DSLR.
Also, don't be scared being new to voice an opinion that's like negative. All my first album reviews are like 5 out of 5 ass kissing articles.
Same.
Like, oh my gosh, I've never heard anything like this, and it's just like, but then when you start writing those articles where like example, somebody would say like, can you write this piece? Can you write this piece? And then you write it and you give them a 2.5 and you're like, this is what I feel. And you shouldn't have asked me to write it over and over because I said no the first time. You're giving yourself that authority and you're saying like, no, my voice, my decision. I don't care if you're my friend. And then you're bumping into those people. Some of them I've done a bad album review and then interviewed them on like my podcast. And I know they've read it and they know that whatever. And then they said, you know, actually you're right about that thing. Like, we didn't have time to do this, or I wasn't really comfortable with that. And you kind of like hit the nail on the head. But kissing somebody's ass isn't going to get you anywhere. Like if it's a critical piece, then at least you're not it. And it also doesn't look like your friend wrote it, like if I'm just kissing somebody's ass for 300 words, then keep on saying that over and over, but like 300 words, then they like, okay, this is also like a garbage album review because there's no way this is a 5 out of 5. Like, it's not the best thing you've ever heard.
But really quick, if you are going to say something negative, make sure you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, don't just, obviously you wouldn't just say it for the sake of saying it, but really make sure you know what you're talking about, because especially if you're new, some people might like tear you to shreds about it, and you better be ready to back it up.
Sorry, like this real quick, but I had a really like brutal first year philosophy course years ago when I was at Carleton, and the prof got us all to buy it. And this is I honestly say this all the time. It's almost indispensable for anyone. It's for writing critical essays. But I urge anyone who wants to get into criticism to read Anthony Weston's A Rule Book for Arguments. And essentially, the only rule of it is, if you're going to make an argument, you've got to argue every point soundly. So if it's a good review or a bad review, you can't, like a bad review, that's the thing, a bad review, you can't just take cheap shots and be like, oh, I don't like fucking Kid Rock. No. It's like, well, why? Why not? Like, and just support every point. But You know, and the same goes for a good review. You have to be able to support it. You can't just go, I really like this.
Right. But it's interesting, I feel like with most reviews for food, for music, whatever, unfortunately, most things you write, you're basically trying to say it was okay in an interesting way. So like, I wish that it was just like, oh, I get to write, oh, it was amazing, or I get to write these horrible reviews where like, it's still like entertaining to read. But most of the time as a critic, like you're just trying to make it's okay sound interesting. And you should figure out a way to do that more than worrying about how to write a really good bad review.
Ben, sorry, just while you're switching the mic, I actually became friends with Ben because he wrote a bad review about a band that I had signed. And we became friends because he was right. And this particular band had a terrible show and did a bunch of wrong things. It was like their first big show that, you know, beyond the clubs. And Ben nailed it. But I kind of freaked him out because I called him and I'm like, hey, it's Steve from Warner. And I could tell on the other end of the phone, he was like, oh, shit, here's another one. I'm like, your review was spot on, and I just wanted to thank you for it. And I'm going to share it with the band and say, he's right, you need to work on this stuff. And we've been friends ever since.
This is a true story. And also my dad, like my dad was our theater arts teacher in high school and was one of the first people to ever assign me a review. And he instilled this in the class. And this is actually a really good piece of advice for anybody who wants to do good too. 98.5% of the time, you can find one thing good about, even if it's something you absolutely hate, there's probably something that was good about it. And you start from there. So you're like, you're not, because there are some music writers, I think, who kind of like build a reputation on doing hatchet jobs on people. I don't think that's a cool way to go. I'd rather be the guy that gives like stuff that's not supposed to get a good review, and respond to it honestly, because that's all you have at the end of the day.
Like that 21 Pilots show.
Yeah, like I just had to go to see 21 Pilots. I was like, this is gonna, I'm like I was dubious. I was like, I had a great time at that show. I did not expect. I was like, I'm not 12 years old. I only know like 2 of these songs. It was a totally pro show. And I'm not, in those situations, I would rather just, like, again, it's an honest expression of your reaction to the music or to the show. In that case, it was more of a show than the music, because a lot of it was canned. But you're, if you respond honestly, then nobody can hold any of that against you, because it's coming from an honest place, and you support what you say, be it good or bad. Does that make any sense? That's just the thing. It's just be honest.
Okay,
don't
Matt,
be a dick. Just don't be a dick.
Matt, last
And
comment.
that's not what I meant.
Oh.
I didn't mean to be say to be a dick, but you should start in a neutral place, and then each thing that you hear is a talking point, and then you have to decide from all your talking points which ones are the most important. Because if you're trying to build trust, you want everybody that reads your article to trust what you say. And when you put out an thing and say, listen to this album, all the people that trust you listen to that album. So don't do a hatchet job. Don't say that somebody sucks. Like, don't do those things. I mean, like, all your words are going to be trusted, and then you're going to have to read those back in 5 years and be like, oh my gosh, look at my portfolio.
Matt, last word on this?
I think Claudia's point reminded me, I think that you're right, and I've never heard it articulated that way, and I think that was really funny. That you're mostly trying to say a whole bunch of stuff about how something's okay. But beyond that, like, there is obviously like the criticism to where you're saying like, oh, this is good or bad musically. I think that where criticism becomes a little elevated is tying that to a cultural moment, or why it's there in the world at this point, and whether it matters or not. Not whether it matters or not, but what basically, like, does this band have something relevant to say, and why is what they're saying relevant or not? Because that's when you're saying that something's okay in so many words over and over and over again, there is, I think, a lot of room to explore why something that's okay is either extremely relevant as well or extremely irrelevant.
That's the thing that like takes a project from okay to good or okay to whatever. Yeah.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. Do we have any closing comments from the panelists? Any burning things you want to say?
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. With that, it's Ben, it's Olivia, it's Claudia, it's Matt. Thank you guys for being a part of this little discussion. Thank you all for staying the full 90. Thank you, Elise and Manitoba Music, for hosting us. Thank you at home for watching, all 7 of you. No, how many people are watching this, do you think? Or eventually, 4 right now? We love all 4 of you.
I've seen like 8 at one time, but
8,
I guess,
guys,
yeah.
8. Amazing. And,
All right.
and thank you all.
And thank you to Steve Jordan for, this was Steve's idea, since Polaris was coming here. So thank you for your time and your work and your moderating. This was an excellent panel. Very excited to share it with other people who have these similar questions. For everyone here and for the online community. As I was saying earlier, this is our last Music Works workshop of this season. And we will have a whole nother season beginning in September, which should be announced in August, probably like the 3rd week when you're still going to festivals, probably. But please stay tuned. We will have a whole new series starting in September. It's going to be great. I'm super excited. And thanks again to all of our panelists. Have a good night.
Woo.